Ypsilanti, Dearborn, and downriver. So as we all know, today is May 2nd and yesterday was May 1st, and many people had rent due yesterday, and many people did not have the ability to pay that rent in the middle of our coronavirus pandemic. So we thought it was very important and necessary to have a discussion about the need for housing policies, particularly during the time of coronavirus, in addition to housing policies at large that we need when this pandemic is over. So that is why today we are having this town hall. I'm really excited to have a whole host of amazing panelists joining us today. So I'm just going to say their names right now and then give a little introductions for them later. These are all amazing housing activists in our area, in the local region here in Michigan. So we have Amber Fellows, Jessica Brzezinski, Timothy Burgess, and Zachary Story. And I'll go ahead and after I make just a couple introductory remarks, I'm going to introduce them further, and then they're going to have the chance to take the floor and tell you all about themselves and some of the work that they're doing and some of the policies and values they believe in. Amazing. So I want to get started just with a little bit of background on me and let you guys know about me and why I'm running. So we'll start from the very beginning. So my name again is Solomon Rajput. Nice to meet everyone. I'm actually a medical student and I'm taking leave of absence to run because I think the issues in our country are way too urgent and we're done waiting on our politicians to do something about it. So when I tell people that I'm a medical student and that I'm running for Congress, everyone gets so confused. They're like, what in the world is a medical student doing running for Congress? I don't understand. How does that happen? And I get it. It's definitely not something you see every day. It's pretty weird. So how did this whole thing come about? I think that a halfway decent answer. So when I was younger, I was really passionate about politics because I was taking a look at our messed up status quo and I was thinking, you know what would be really cool to try to do something about these big issues. You know, we've got our impending climate crisis, our crisis around affordable housing, our broken and dysfunctional healthcare system, the insanity cost of college education. I was thinking, you know what, it'd be really cool to do something about these issues. Maybe I'll get involved in politics to try to solve some of these problems. But the more I was thinking about it, the more I realized, oh wait, actually, you can't count on the government to get anything done. They will literally never do anything because they're just bought and sold by big businesses. And so I realized, well, there's no way in heck that I'm going to sign up to be a shill to corporations. Like I can't be a puppet to big business. I'm sorry, I'm out. So I guess I'm gonna have to do something else then. And ultimately I ended up in medical school because it's a way to help people when they're going through a really tough time. And I was thinking, maybe we can change our healthcare system from the inside out. But now times are changing, which is really exciting. And we've got a whole new generation of leaders who are saying we're not gonna be beholden to corporate interests any longer. We're gonna go out there and fight unapologetically for what people in this country need for us to get done. So that really inspired me, seeing people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. And I was thinking, maybe if we get the right people in office, we actually can do something about these big problems for once. And so after a lot of reflection, I ultimately decided to run because the establishment has totally failed us. All they know how to do is to think small. But it's that same small thinking that's gotten us into this mess in the first place. I think by now it's clear to everyone that we can't just keep putting band-aids on our broken systems and expecting things to change. We need to go out there and fight for the big, bold policies that are going to address our issues at a fundamental structural level. So we've begged and pleaded with our politicians for a long time to go out there and fight for these big changes, but they've ignored us time and time again. And after a while, we have to realize that we can only beg for so long before it's clear that these people, they are never going to go out there and fight for what we need to get done. They are never going to change. So if we want to get this stuff done, we got to go do it ourselves because at this point, we're done waiting. And we are certainly done waiting on our broken and ineffective housing policies that abandon so many people in our country, making it hard for them to afford living with dignity if they can even find a place to live at all. So our campaign in particular, especially during the midst of this coronavirus, has gotten really active with housing policy and with housing advocacy. And specifically, we've gotten very involved with an organization that was founded recently called Rent Strike 2020. We've been really happy with how much momentum Rent Strike has picked up. It's a national movement that has largely been organized by members of the Rose Caucus, which is a group of democratic socialists and socialist candidates across the country that are coming together and demanding a vision for America that is very different than the one that we have now, and it's what is needed for all people in our country. And our campaign in particular has been in charge of organizing Rent Strike here in Michigan. So Rent Strike started as a series of petitions for each state across the country, and the petitions are demanding that we suspend all rent, mortgage, and utility payments for the duration of the coronavirus. I'm very proud to say that in Michigan alone, we have over 250,000 signatures, and we plan to deliver this petition to Governor Whitmer sometime in the next few weeks. This is a ton of signatures. Just for some context, you only need 100,000 signatures across the country in order to get a response from the White House. This problem is affecting so many people across our state and the nation, which is precisely why we need to provide relief right now in the middle of this pandemic. And so when people hear rent strike, they often get confused by what we mean. We don't think that a single person should just strike their rent as a first resort. You need to organize with people in your building or other tenants who have the same landlord. If all of your appeals are ignored and you have warned your landlord that you and other organizers are going to strike rent, then we advocate for you to strike rent. Just as in any other socialist or labor cause, striking is a response to the ruling class ignoring your demands. We also do not advise striking alone or without organization, because we are much more likely to change the unequal tenant-landlord system if we organize together. I believe that we must cancel rent, mortgage, and utility payments during this pandemic. This means that tenants will not pay rent and landlords will not need to pay mortgage payments. I agree with the plan that Representative Ilhan Omar proposed, which would have full payment forgiveness and no penalization for people's credit scores. This legislation would also establish a relief fund for landlords who get their income from tenants and create a different fund to finance purchases of private rental homes by nonprofits, cooperatives, and other organizations in order to establish more robust, affordable housing during this epidemic. So we're talking about, again, suspending rent, mortgage, and utility payments so that all renters and homeowners who are landlords who make their income from their rent are able to all be financially solvent during this time. But we need to make housing affordable and remain concerned about the cost of rent even after this pandemic is over. In Michigan, cities aren't allowed to create rent control measures. So in Ann Arbor alone, rent went up 15% between 2018 and 2019. This means that families were pushed out of their homes and more people became housing insecure. Instead of building affordable housing, the cities continue to allow luxury high-rise apartments to be built. Housing is just not a priority. Housing is not just a priority because of the coronavirus. There has been vast inequity in our tenant-landlord system for decades. The effects that COVID-19 has had on homeowners and renters just shows exactly how broken our system is. We must not only cancel rent right now, but organize around this movement to ensure housing to be a human right in the future. That's precisely why I'm excited about all the Housing for All plans that our campaign is putting forward. So we would want to institute rent control measures so that the maximum rent increase every year would be 3%. We also want to set aside federal funding to develop many more affordable housing units. And we want to renovate the existing housing units which are falling into disrepair. One plan in particular that I'm really excited for has been proposed by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Ocasio-Cortez. They've teamed up to create a Green New Deal for housing, which would completely reinvigorate public housing over the period of 10 years. The aim is to make robust communities, update infrastructure to make housing more climate resistant and sustainable, and encourage overall investment in public housing and sustainable energy. The prospect of sustainable and robust housing is extremely exciting. We can employ thousands of people every year through this program, and in the process make our earth cleaner and provide homes to thousands of individuals. So I'm excited for what the future brings. I'm excited to see how much more equitable our country can become when people have access to housing. I'm excited about Bernie and AOC's plan and what that means for our planet and for climate justice. Every single progressive movement is inseparable from the next, and we need to keep fighting for housing justice. So I'm asking you to organize your communities, sign the rent strike petitions in your state by going to rentstrike2020.org. And I'm asking you to stand up against the rising inequity in order to ensure this promising future. So that's a little bit about me. And that's a little bit about some of the housing policies and initiatives that our campaign supports. But I want to get to the many more interesting people on this panel. So we'll start off with Zachary Story. He's somebody that many of you know, but you probably don't know that you know. If you live in Ann Arbor, if you go to Ann Arbor regularly, he actually is Ann Arbor's violin monster. I'm sure you've seen him around. He is in a werewolf mask and playing the violin downtown Ann Arbor. He's an advocate for the homeless population in Ann Arbor and a proponent of affordable housing in the city due to his own experience with homelessness. He continues to fight for the homeless population in Ann Arbor during this crisis. So, Zachary, love to turn the mic over to you, and feel free to take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And the more that I learn about housing, the less I feel like I know, and that's continued. So I've met so many people that are, working on a lot of different areas of housing. But for me, what I've been thinking about during the crisis is how I've seen a lot of local politicians, say we support essential workers, and I'm like, well, you don't on housing policy. And I think we have to ask ourselves, the people who are working right now, becoming in more contact with the possibility of getting the virus, are pushed out of the wealthy community that I live in Ann Arbor. And I think we need to check our values and say that people of all income levels are important and are needed in our city. And as far as what you said, I experienced homelessness briefly from mid-November to early January, just this past winter. And I probably was the most privileged houseless person at that time, but I saw a lot, just the vast need in the community that I didn't know about. So yeah, I guess that's my introduction of myself. I don't know what else to add right now. But I guess how I got started was in getting frustrated at the national level and then looking at the local level. And I started committing going to our city council meetings. And then after a while, I started speaking at public comment every time. So I think that's how things have started for me, and I'm glad to be doing something for in local politics.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for deciding to spend your Saturday evening with us talking about these affordable housing issues. And we're really, really excited to have you. And we've got a great set of questions and pieces of discussion that I think that you're going to add a lot to. So thank you for joining. Next up, I'm going to introduce Amber Fellows. She's an amazing organizer. She's lived in Ypsilanti for 17 years. She's a renter, social worker, musician, and former chair of the City of Ypsilanti Human Relations Commission. She's been part of the coordinated housing and anti-gentrification organizing since 2017, and has worked to platform a broadening conversation around housing rights and development towards material and policy change. So Amber, feel free to take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks so much to Sierra and Solomon for putting this together, and just really glad to be a part of this discussion. I know that there's been a lot of Zoom calls and live streams, but I think, talking about these issues is the only way we're going to be able to organize towards the goals that we want to see. So I'm happy to try to participate in that. So yeah, I think your introduction summed it up quite a bit. I've moved to the area 17 years ago for school, and I ended up putting down roots, working, and eventually I started working as a social worker, and eventually made my way into housing. But before all of that, I really relate to Zachary, your article in the MLive, where you talked about, just being someone that's around and a musician and not necessarily interested in going to city council, but that you're basically like compelled to do it, or radicalized by your experience of housing instability, and that you felt like you had to do that. And I think that's what's happened to a lot of us. I was someone that was always interested in organizing, and I have done some in the past, but it wasn't really into my own housing instability experiences that I was kind of radicalized and compelled to talk about what was going on to me, what was going on to all my friends, and to start going to city council meetings myself and organizing. So that happened to start in 2017, the organizing piece. I had experienced 2 bouts of housing instability when I was displaced, like twice in the same year. I was able to find housing, and so I feel relatively pretty privileged. A lot of my friends are just like constantly moving all the time because of how insecure their housing is. So we started meeting, just talking about some of our struggles. It didn't seem like that was a conversation that was happening as much, at least around me at the time. And it just caught on like wildfire. People are struggling and want to have a place to talk about it. So we all started a meeting. We formed this group called Defend Affordable IPSI. And from there, I happened to also be on the Human Relations Commission at the same time, and was able to kind of alert my community to things that were happening at the city level, and found that the city was, working with a group to develop our largest piece of public land called Water Street. And from there, we learned more about this developer and more about what the plans are, and organized some actions to bring more of the public's attention to the project, to investigate the project, to show some of the, less incredible things about the project. And eventually we were able to stop it. So we had some successes. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my journey. And since then I've been in other organizing groups and have had some successes, some losses, and would be happy to talk about that more later.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amber. I'm really excited for you to share your experience. That's fantastic that you were able to win against what I'm sure must have been like a big developer who was really trying as hard as they could to push their project onto your city. So that's no easy feat. And I think it really shows the power of organized people. And I think that that's a perfect segue to our next set of panelists. So we're very, very lucky and blessed to have Jessica Brzezinski and Tucker Bergen join us today. So they are actually the founders of the Trevor Crossing Tenants Association, local activists, organizers here, and they went up against McKinley Company, which owns properties all across the country, and they won, which is fantastic. And I'm so excited to hear them talk about it. So if you guys just want to introduce yourselves briefly right now, and then we'll go ahead and hear more of your story, later on in our discussion.
So I'm Jessica Brzezinski, and so I've only been a tenant since January when I started organizing in March. But I have a lot of experience organizing. Like I've done a lot of different types of organizing. I've done anti-fascist work. When I was an undergraduate in the 1990s, I did organizing against sexual assault on campus and the university's covering up of those assaults. I was really involved with the affirmative action lawsuits against the University of Michigan, defending affirmative action. And I've done like some union organizing, like workplace organizing. So I have a lot of experience organizing, although I'm pretty new to doing the housing organizing. So yeah, in March, I initiated what it turned into, the Traver Crossing Tenants Association. And Tucker and I want to do like later on, we want to give like a blow by blow, like this happened, then we did this. And then, because I think that could be like a very helpful thing for other people who want to organize in their complexes. And what I really would like to contribute to this and hope like that some of us can get out of it is action, because that's really what it takes. I mean, I feel like probably everybody on this Zoom call right now, like we're kind of on the same wavelength as far as our ideas, but what really changes things is when we organize. There's real power in mass action and organizing. You can get things done and you can change life for yourself and for the people that you care about. And I'm a huge believer in that. Like that's been like the common thread through all the types of organizing that I've done. And I've just seen like amazing, like, you know, basically what seems like miracles happen when you organize. Yeah, in general, I'm a socialist. I believe that this pandemic is really exposing the ways in which capitalism is a very inefficient and cruel way to run a society, where we have farmers plowing their crops into the ground because they can't sell them, and food banks that can't get food to feed hungry people. I mean, it's just, it's a complete train wreck. And I do believe that our way out is through organizing. And I do support, you know, progressive candidates, socialist candidates running for office. But my core belief is that it takes a mass movement. Like that's where our real power can come from. And so that's what I'm focused on. Tucker.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. My name is Tucker Bergen, and I'm just some guy. A little bit starstruck by all of these people on the panel that I'm having the privilege of speaking next to right now. So I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan, and I have kind of no professional or prior to this even any experience whatsoever with housing advocacy. And so it's been a really incredible experience for me in the past, I guess it's been a couple months now, since I joined Jessica in getting this Traver Crossing Tenants Association going, towards learning about these issues and understanding, you know, just how impactful this is on people's lives, and how important it is to have housing secure, you know, before you can even do anything else in your life or even think about anything else, you know, maybe second only to food security. And so my, you know, perspective coming into this is as someone who was, you know, radicalized, I would say, not by my own housing insecurity, very lucky for me, but instead by just the horror show that is our national political stage right now. And it's draining to be so plugged into that and to see it, you know, especially now during the COVID-19 crisis where we're all stuck at home and there's not much to do often other than just look at your Twitter feed. You're kind of blasted like by the fire hose of horror shows. And so I wanted to look towards something I could do actually actionable. And thanks to Jessica, I was able to find something that was actually making a lot of progress. So really excited to be here and to participate in this discussion as a newcomer. And I guess I'll pass it off back to you, Solomon.
Perfect. Yeah. You know, you started like, first of all, thank you, Jessica. And thank you so much, Tucker, for joining our call. I think you guys, I mean, I personally am so excited to hear this like blow by blow, like how you guys were able to successfully organize a rent strike and go up against this big company and win and assert your rights as humans and as citizens of the world. So I think that is going to be very informative. And I completely agree with you, Jessica, when you say that essentially all change comes from the bottom up. And I agree that, you know, we should all support progressive candidates, but ultimately the most important thing at the end of the day is for everyone to get involved and everyone to voice their concerns together in an organized structure and movement to demand like what we all people need, you know. And I think it goes without saying, and I'm happy that more and more people agree that housing is a human right. You know, like food, like water, you need housing in order to be able to live as a person. And so I completely agree. And I'm really excited to kind of hear what all went down. And Tucker, you know, you start off by saying, I'm just some guy. Like, that's all of us. I'm just some guy, like Amber and Jessica are just some women and Zachary's just some guy too, right? So we're all just people. We're all just people. And certainly I think that I can like take on the I'm just some guy like role like very well, because when I started running, everyone's like, who is this guy? He's just some guy. And I'm like, precisely, I am just some guy, but I'm some guy who is done waiting on our politicians to act when the urgency is apparent to everyone but them, right? And like how you were also compelled by the horrors of our government, the establishment, the national political landscape right now, and felt some urgency to act. So I think all of us, just some people, need to get in this together and start doing that kind of thing. So,
amen.
Right? Yeah, right. So this is going to be for the audience. This is going to be how the rest of our conversation goes, just so that you have some context. So I have a series of discussion questions that I'm going to introduce to the panelists, and some of them will be more oriented to a particular panelist, and then everyone can join in after that panelist has a chance to say what they're going to say, and I'm going to direct the question to that panelist. Other questions are going to be open to all people, so whoever just feels so compelled to kind of jump in, please feel free right off the bat. And then I think what would be really great is at the end we can hear from Jessica and Tucker on a play-by-play of like what happened, because like Jessica said, ultimately we can all talk about policy, we can all talk about our ideology, which I'm sure many of us are in agreement with, and it is nice to have these nuanced discussions and be able to elaborate further to help us expand our knowledge base and understand these issues in more depth. But at the same time, ultimately, ideas just remain ideas unless we act. So I think that call to action at the end would be really cool. And so we'll try to wrap up this whole discussion, including that call to action, by around 7:30 or 7:40, and then we'll leave about 20 to 30 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And so if anyone has any questions, please feel free in whatever platform you are viewing this from, whether it's YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or Facebook Live, to just write in the chat. And we have people on my team who will be relaying those questions to us. So if any time you feel like you want to ask a question, audience members, please feel free to do that. All right, so our first question is actually to Zachary. And it requires a little context. So, in a strictly monetary sense, right? What is housing insecurity defined as? It's often determined by what percentage of a tenant's monthly income is spent on rent. So if you spend more than 30% of your monthly income on rent, this means that you are housing insecure. That is a definition of housing insecurity. So what other ways do you think we can define housing insecurity that is more than just the percentage of income spent on rent?
So it's how many times have you moved? How often? There are a lot of people. Everybody has their own personal story, and so for me, I guess technically, from that definition, and everything, I've been housing insecure since I was about 19. Maybe not the whole time, but I've done a lot of moving around. And a lot of it was choice. I mean, for me, I've been lucky through my upbringing. I was born into the middle class in white Connecticut, and I, as a kid, I didn't know anything about the world. And then, so, I come from that. I have family members that when I was going through houselessness, I didn't tell a lot of people that were close to me because I knew they would, say, oh, come over to my house or whatever. And performing as Violin Monster since 2011, I've lived in Ann Arbor, getting sublets in the summer when that's the only time in Ann Arbor you can find something that's really low, but that's like May through August or mid-April through August. And then I would travel in the winters and go to New Orleans, Austin, and places in California and perform. And it was a great lifestyle for me, but I want to take a break from traveling. And that's when I personally was like, oh, this is so much harder when I don't have as much income in the winter and all that. I feel like I'm veering off from your your question, but people have all different types of bills, and in our generation or my generation and younger, it's a lot of accumulated student debt. There are people with child support payments. There are medical bills. You know, that's part of it. And depending on the community that you're in and the level of gentrification, and in Ann Arbor is the 8th most economically segregated community in the country. And so, yeah, no, we have panelists that are experts in IPSI gentrification, and but it's the whole county and beyond. You know, we're all interconnected. And what the University of Michigan, who has the most money and the most power, and the city of Ann Arbor have responsibility to not just the city, but surrounding residents. And plain and simple, there isn't enough housing at every income level. So again, I am sorry, I forget the original question. I think I'll stop.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, like, these are how panel discussions go. That's what a discussion is.
Yeah, it's my first one. So.
You're doing an amazing job. You're doing fantastic. So it's definitely not going to be your last. But essentially, you know, and I'd like to open this up to everyone else on the panel as well. You know, are there other factors that contribute to housing insecurity than just specifically the percent of income that goes to your rent, right? And like, what other factors can be affected by a person's housing status? Amber or Jessica or Tucker, does anyone want to chime in there?
I feel like I can talk about this a little bit. I think the original question I heard was, you know, how might we define housing security or housing insecurity? And we don't have like a federal definition for housing insecurity like we do with homelessness. But there are kind of a growing number of, you know, adjacent agencies that are kind of talking about what housing insecurity could look like as a definition. It could, and I bring this up because I am a part of the Ypsilanti Housing Affordability and Accessibility Committee, and we have done a couple surveys to assess the level of homelessness, housing insecurity, the different problems that people are facing, how much rent's increasing, those kind of things. And we did ask about housing insecurity, and the way we framed that is we asked, you know, if people are having trouble paying rent, if they move frequently, if they're staying with friends or relatives, if they're couch surfing, if they live in an unstable neighborhood, if there's overcrowding in their home, or if they're fleeing domestic violence, or if most of their income goes to housing. And based on those sets of questions, 530 respondents, 49% of people could potentially be labeled housing insecure in Ypsilanti. So that was really not surprising, but just seeing the numbers laid out, it's like, okay, I think we need to start talking about this more along with homelessness, because, you know, these are interrelated issues. As far as things that can compound housing insecurity, there's many things. Obviously, income is one of them, gentrification, but there's also like criminal background checks and, you know, credit checks, landlord history, ability to have upfront money for deposit and first month's rent and last month's rent, references. There's so many things. And especially in Ann Arbor, because I help people find housing in Ann Arbor as well, starting to see just it's almost like completely inaccessible for lower working class people to find housing in Ann Arbor, not even because of their income restraints, but because of all the different checks and barriers there are to even getting through the application process. There's also voucher discrimination going on, and we know about that.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few things going on as far as that goes.
What could you talk a little bit about what are some of the like if it's for the people who are trying to find housing in Ann Arbor, if it's not just income, but like some of these other checks that are going on, what some of those might be?
Well, landlords want to see rental history. They want to see letters of recommendation, references. They want a high credit score, and they want to have a minimum income. So if you don't make, 40,000 or more, then you don't qualify because this would be more than 30% of your income. Clear background check, criminal history check, and some of them want like a holding fee just to kind of start the process of getting the apartment, which can be like $200 on top of security deposit, as well as first month's rent. So you almost need a mortgage amount of money, like a down payment on your mortgage, to be able to find an apartment and secure it.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that perspective.
One thing that I think we could also add to that is that perhaps this should have already been obvious, but one thing that's been made glaringly obvious by the COVID-19 crisis is that housing affordability and housing security is directly tied to income security. And so, for example, the primary motivating factor behind the Rent Strike 2020 movement is that there's a record smashing huge number of people who are facing unemployment now. And there hasn't been any kind of response at the national level, really, and certainly not within Michigan, to kind of stem that bleeding. Basically, there's been the $1,200 that we get once that a lot of people, especially people who are already facing housing insecurity, are not able to get out in a timely manner due to lack of access to maybe even a phone or an internet connection or a lack of a tax history. And that's basically it. And I don't know about the rest of the people on this call, except maybe Jessica, since we live in the same community, but $1,200 is not enough to buoy me through several months of rent, as is going to be the case for so many people, where as in that's what they're going to need. So clearly there needs to be a response, at all levels of government that are actually addressing not only the housing insecurity problem directly, but also the income insecurity problem that directly feeds into it.
Right. The only thing I would like to add is that relationship issues can contribute to your housing insecurity. That's why I'm a new tenant. It was very difficult to find something in Ann Arbor, where my daughter could still go to the same school and not have to switch schools on top of everything else. It was very difficult to find something that was affordable. And frankly, this is not affordable. This is the cheapest I could find. It's not something that I can even do long term. And I have other friends who have similar issues, whether people who are going through divorces during the pandemic and have to stay living with their ex, and it's a horrible situation.
Yeah, they're like, sorry, go ahead, Amber.
I'd just like to add to that. I do think, the issues between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti are definitely linked, but they can look quite different based on the type of demographics and income levels that are between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor. So I do think that Ypsi residents, at least some of them, a large portion of them are facing unique scenarios in these issues of housing instability. And I think that especially low-income people are quite penalized by the way things are set up. I just want to mention that, there's some property managers that are charging monthly fees for not having renter's insurance, as in they're not providing renter's insurance, they're just penalizing people for not being able to afford renter's insurance. There's also, late fees that are stacking up for people that can't afford to pay on the first. There are fees for securing money orders or payments on top of your normal rent. There's, pet fees, other licensing and vaccine and requirements and subletting fees and all these things. And I think that, poor working class people are much more impacted by that than people that have a secure income at a certain rate.
Mhm.
For sure. Yeah. So long story short, there's a whole host of factors other than just income, right? There's like Jessica talked about relationship issue, like relationship status might affect housing status. Amber brought up all of the different issues that come with like socioeconomic challenges, right? And then and Zachary as well talked about how, you know, based on your context, you know, and if you're like living with friends at one period of time, but then your circumstances change, like all of a sudden you're housing insecure, right?
Yeah, and the choices that you have available to me. I want to stress that in a heartbeat, I had family members and people that would have taken me in, but it wasn't in Ann Arbor, and it wasn't, it really put it in my face that people at all income levels that contribute to a city, and that's what makes a city great, is the diversity, should be able to live in the community that they are a part of. But not everybody has choices like that. I had a sudden change in housing that I needed to find, and I put all my stuff in a storage unit. I was able to afford that. And there are some people that get storage units and then lose all of their most precious possessions that way because they can't pay it the next month. So, I guarantee that, for every person that experiences it, there's a different story. And yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is, in particular, we see like with Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, right? Like in Ann Arbor, we have so many people who work in Ann Arbor, commute to the city, but are not able to actually afford living in the city because it's so expensive, right? And so we expect all these people to come and make our city function by taking these lower income jobs, but then say that, well, you can't actually live here. We're going to relegate you somewhere else. And housing activists have properly pointed out that Ann Arbor's affordable housing plan right now is having Ypsilanti existing, 10, 15 minutes away, and the lower prices that you see in Ypsilanti. But at the same time, even those prices are increasing because of gentrification. And so I want to ask everyone, can you define gentrification? Specifically the gentrification going on in Washtenaw and Wayne County, which is where this congressional district is. What sort of factors do you believe contribute to the economic and racial shifts going on in Ypsilanti and the surrounding areas? Another question that you guys can spring off of is, in Ann Arbor, how's the gentrification of areas like downtown and Main Street impacted the availability of affordable housing for people who work there? So that's a lot, but whoever wants to jump in.
Well, the first thought that I have in response to that question is that gentrification may just be the most complicated housing issue that there is. The more that you read about it, the more that you think about it and talk to people who are going through it, the more clear it becomes that this is a extremely multifaceted issue. I think something Zachary said earlier is very poignant here. It's that there are as many different situations as there are people experiencing housing insecurity. And that's absolutely the case for gentrification as well. So I won't make an effort to define gentrification myself, because I don't think that I'm sufficiently educated on the topic to make that effort. But I do want to just emphasize that this is an issue that touches everything. It touches economics, it touches racial issues, it touches matters of discrimination around mental health and socioeconomic status, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's definitely not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to any sort of gentrification issue.
I agree that, this issue has a lot of sides and can be talked about in nuance, but I also think that we do need to name what this is, for it to be taken seriously and understood, and so we can change it and have action. I don't think I'm the authority on exactly the perfect definition for gentrification, but there's a lot of literature out there and you can read it, and there's some basic frameworks for how to understand gentrification, which is basically the systematic displacement of a people for another group of people. And it is definitely has to do with whiteness. It definitely has to do with capital and income. But it also has to do with government support. So, we understand that gentrification comes in waves. So oftentimes the first step is that individuals without any support from the government just come into lower income neighborhoods and start redeveloping and improving households and living there. And then eventually, and also there's no media support around them. It's just kind of a quiet word of mouth thing. That's how it can start often. And I think that has been the case for Washtenaw County going back to the 70s. But eventually there becomes more government intervention because they see potentially the advantage to increasing their tax base with this group of people that has a higher income. And so they start subsidizing folks to attract people into the neighborhoods, give them programs to increase tax abatements if you develop in this particular neighborhood, which is exactly what's happening with the South Side neighborhood in Ypsilanti. There's abatements for new property owners to come in, as well as things like the media starting to say, well, Ypsilanti is a very attractive alternative to Ann Arbor, and here's why, and here are these very affordable units that you can buy. And then other examples like U of M. So U of M has a program called Beyond the Diag, and at some point, Beyond the Diag started telling their incoming students that if you can't afford Ann Arbor, you should rent in Ypsilanti. And that's had such a huge impact in the last maybe 4 years or so of kind of this major shift of what our community looks like. And I think, it's a growing pain for us to understand that this is really a kind of feature of white supremacy, and also of, a class conflict of the ownership class and the renting class. But we have to move beyond that and have these conversations to, work towards solutions. So one other example I might bring up is, so the Office for Economic Development, the Washtenaw Office for Economic Development, put out a study of housing in Washtenaw in 2015 that said that Ann Arbor needs to build more affordable units. And it recommended that Ypsilanti stop providing more affordable units because they need to increase the retention of college educated folks. And so they, it's a government entity saying you need to gentrify. And, I think that report by the people that are at the OCED right now they criticize it a little bit, but it's things like that that really make the difference. So it is kind of this municipal growth machine where a government that's thirsty for a higher tax base, is enacting the machinations of gentrification, which is a genocidal act, just very slow.
What you said about the university, I had no idea that they had a campaign kind of promoting Ypsi as a housing place, and that from going to Ann Arbor City Council meetings, a lot of times the council seems to say it's the University of Michigan's fault for housing, they haven't built any new dorms. And then the University of Michigan says, well, you know, that's a city of Ann Arbor. Let's let the market decide. They should build it, because if we build the housing, the city doesn't get taxes. So we're waiting for them to build it. So it just is, there's so much gridlock, you know, locally from what I've observed. And that's really interesting to me to learn that they've been promoting IPSI for their students. U of M has a food pantry that an international friend of mine, she's a PhD student, she goes there. And I have the feeling that the University of Michigan has a lot of students from lower income levels who get into the school but decide not to come here. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for sharing that.
Speaking of the University of Michigan's role in this issue, in addition to my advocacy work here as a tenant, I'm also a member of the Graduate Employees Organization at the university, which is just a union of graduate students, predominantly teaching graduate students, but you know, the issues affect all sorts of graduate students. And during our most recent negotiations with the university, I can't get into details, I think, but one of the key issues was that the university was of the mind that it was not important to provide a living wage to graduate students because, as they put it, graduate students at the University of Michigan shouldn't feel like they have to live in Ann Arbor, the implication being that they should live in Ypsilanti, most likely. And it's kind of a striking attitude when you have an organization as wealthy as the University of Michigan that employs as many people as it does, that is just of the mind that the class of individuals, of workers, graduate students who do the vast majority of the, you know, the groundwork in terms of education and teaching of undergraduates, is kind of a lower class that should be kind of pushed out of the city, just by economic factors, if nothing else. And they didn't seem particularly moved by, was my impression, by worries of gentrification. That doesn't seem to be really an issue for them, which is something that absolutely needs to change at their level.
Yeah, I like that phrase. They shouldn't feel that they have to live in Ann Arbor. Poverty, freedom, yes. That's really
Exactly.
great. What a university phrase. Okay.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, as Tucker initially pointed out, it's certainly a very challenging issue, but one that is multifaceted. And I really appreciate how Amber described the issue as, like, it's the slow but sure displacement of one group of people for another group of people that is, like, and in many ways, like an act of violence, right? And, like, telling these people, yeah, you know, it doesn't matter that you've lived here for a long time, but, like, now these, like, rich people and often white people are just going to live here now because, like, that's just kind of what is going to happen. And sorry, like, that's how the cookie crumbles. Essentially, it seems like, you know, a lot of the narrative that we use around many broken things in our society, which is just that, like, that's just how things are. That's just, you know, our healthcare system is set up like that. That's just how things are. You know, jobs are leaving. And now you don't have a job because that's just how our economy is. You know, it's just like kind of this underlying
apathy
that where the government feels like they are helpless almost, even though they're the ones who are the manufacturers of the circumstances. And actually, it was really funny. I was hearing like, I think it was like a social commentator, like a comedian or some combo or something. They were talking about how, you know, senators in our country are acting like middle management at, like, you know, some, like, fast food franchise. They're like, I'm sorry, like, this is the best I can do. It's beyond me, you know, like, and so much so that they can't even advocate for the changes. They feel like they can't even advocate because people are just asking, like, everyone knows one person can't do anything, right? But, like, you can at least be an advocate for something. And they're like, oh, you know, I would love to, I would, but, you know, it's beyond my control to even name something or want something. So, and then certainly difficult.
Maybe she could just.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'll just add that just to tie it into the national framework, like you were just doing. There is the fact that the austerity of the last 40 years from the federal government to the states means that municipalities have to find another way to fund services. And so this is what they've done. They've learned to fund services through increased tax base. So it isn't something that's just happening on some localized level. It goes all the way to the top.
I'd like to add that gentrification happens in multiple waves too. So like IPSY being marketed now to students or artists or as a cheaper alternative to Ann Arbor, eventually when the market's low enough, property owner, speculators outside people buy up a lot of land, and they kind of dictate, okay, now that one group of people is pushed out, now we're going to raise rents on everything and add, different style of businesses. And so people who displace one group of people are sometimes the next people to be displaced in that same area. So that's, I guess, what I know about gentrification, at least. But
I actually have an interesting personal experience with that. From when I first moved to Ann Arbor, I lived on the directions are difficult, the west side of downtown, in just like a tiny studio apartment that was affordable for me at the time. And I later learned that part of the city was historically a Black neighborhood. Yeah.
Oh, Black neighborhood?
Yeah, originally a Black neighborhood, and then it had been kind of gentrified by the presence of wealth in Ann Arbor into kind of more of a working class white neighborhood. God knows the horrors that must have entailed. And then the reason that I ended up moving out from that is because while I was living there, the property was purchased by an outside speculator who was interested in turning the building I lived in into retail space to extend downtown. And so I think what you said is exactly correct, that it's kind of this rolling process of removing whoever is not able to afford the expanding influence of capital in the area, and just generally slowly building it up into more and more expensive and unlivable conditions.
Yeah, and now if I am thinking it's the same neighborhood, is that part of the historical Old West Side?
Yes.
Yeah. So now what a lot of homeowners and landlords will do is make it a historical district. So like you said, if it used to be an African-American neighborhood, working class people as well. Now it's a historical district, and they just make it next to impossible to change zoning. And another place that I found out was like the Black business district in Ann Arbor was Carytown.
Yeah.
Until the 80s or 90s. And how I found out about it is I was, that's where I perform all the time in the farmer's market. And there's a plaque on the wall with pictures of the news and stuff and what was going on, saying, it's just a trip, the history is right there. And I think we need to own our history, our local history, our history of the country. There's a lot of issues surrounding this. So we have to have these conversations. So.
Yeah, for sure. And so, talking about gentrification, it's certainly something that we're all concerned about. And so I wanted to ask Amber, what sort of governmental interventions should be prioritized to stop gentrification and housing insecurity, especially in the time of this pandemic and looking forward? What do you think can be done? And I also really want to ask that in the context of, well, right now, because this is a problem that is like beyond any like, it's beyond the people that often like participate in it. It seems because if a student wants to come to the University of Michigan, but they like can't afford housing in Michigan, and then now there's like housing in Ypsilanti, and these are like they're low income, or a graduate student's low income, or like we go from now what was a Black community to like a low income working class white community. Like that's not what we want, because we don't want to displace Black people, but these like working class white people are also low income, so they were trying to find so I mean it's like very, I think that's kind of where some of the where people perceive some of the like the difficulty to be, because like I don't want us to be blaming like low income people who are trying to find a place to live either, so what are some of your thoughts in terms of how we can like try to stop gentrification, or governmental things that we can do to address that issue?
Yeah, with the governmental interventions, there's the small interventions to try to deal with some of the symptoms, but really it is a whole ideological change, right? And we're trying to have this conversation on all levels of government. I'm sorry, I'm hearing another voice, but that we need to really change our value system around what the purpose of a city is for. And so if we are orienting ourselves towards, human need and potential, then we need to invest in services. We need to invest in housing for people of all income levels. We need to have robust support of just basic needs. And that would be a radical change to kind of how our governments are currently working for us. But as far as like on the smaller like interventions, I can say that, while I was on the Human Relations Commission, we did do some changes. We recommended that our non-discrimination ordinance update source of income definition to include housing vouchers and to include student loans, so that those could be included as income and people cannot be discriminated against for using those sources of income to pay for their housing. Currently, Ann Arbor does not have that on their books, and I do think Ann Arbor needs that to have on their books. At the same time, these interventions are only as good as they are being enacted and effective. So if no one is calling in complaints for being discriminated against based on their income, then there must be a reason why. It's maybe because it's not very effective or they don't know about it, but we need to do more to promote those type of things. With the Housing Affordability and Accessibility Commission, we put out a second survey that asked residents about a whole host of ideas for what to do for, increasing affordability in the community. And, some of those ideas included community land trusts, inclusionary housing ordinance, building a homeless shelter, kind of minor home repair programs, creating a landlord incentive program to stabilize rent, many different types of policies, but bar none, the most popular and supported policy was rent control. So, organizing around rent control is difficult in Michigan because our state currently bans it. Yeah. But the thing is, there are groups that are talking about doing kind of a progressive trigger law type petition, which means that you would petition for rent control knowing that the state currently bans it. But the idea is to send a message to the state that there's communities interested in this, and that as soon as it's not banned, whenever that changes on the state level, Ypsilanti will have the first rent control ordinance. And within that ordinance, you can embed protections for people that include things like just cause eviction, which I'm sure some people are familiar with, but it means that there's only certain things that a landlord or a property manager can file eviction against. It can't be for any reason. There are already limitations to which people can file eviction in Michigan, but for instance, if your lease ends, you really have, and your landlord doesn't want you there, you have no, they could just, you have to leave. So just cause eviction is one thing, and right of first refusal, meaning that if your building is sold by the property manager, that the tenants would have the first opportunity to buy the building, or a third party like a nonprofit could buy the building to stabilize the housing for people. So those are just a couple ideas for kind of government intervention, but I think things that are pretty popular and being talked about.
Yeah, and on the government intervention side of things, I know that Seattle and Denver, their city councils have both passed resolutions calling for rent moratoriums and mortgage moratoriums. The resolutions are non-binding, so they can't legally enforce them, but I still think it's a great step, because it's really, right now, the government policies are actually acting against what we need and not getting us closer to what we need. So our Traver Crossing Tenants Association, also, we are pursuing with the Ann Arbor City Council, trying to do something similar for the Ann Arbor City Council to say that there should be that rent cancellation and nobody should have to pay their mortgages. And one of the things we were gonna ask people at the end of this to do is to contact us if they wanna work on us with this resolution in the City Council. So specifically what we're asking for in the resolution is for Governor Whitmer to use the full extent of her emergency powers to impose an immediate moratorium on residential and commercial rent, and then including like all these associated costs, so that no Ann Arbor resident should be required to pay rent during the health emergency or accumulate debt. Because the problem is then, even if, unless it's completely canceled, then you just have a situation in which we're heavily in debt, and then we have a wave of evictions after coronavirus. Then it also is calling on Governor Whitmer to urge legislators and President Trump's administration to impose an immediate moratorium on residential and commercial mortgage payments nationally. And the Ann Arbor City Council calls on Ann Arbor landlords to freeze rents at current rates for the duration of this public health crisis. So if anybody would like to help us with that in the City Council, please let us know after this.
That'd be great. So just since we're talking about that right now, Jessica, how could somebody reach out to you and Tucker to get involved with that?
It's travercrossingta@gmail.com. So it's travercrossingta@gmail.com.
Perfect.
And you can also contact me on Facebook.
Okay, yeah, and her name is Jessica Przinski, right? So, and then also at the very end, we'll have you just like say that again, just for like at the very end, just to make sure that everyone's got that. Well, first of all, that's amazing. I'm really excited. That resolution like very closely mirrors what the Rent Strike 2020 organization is calling on Governor Whitmer to do, and all the governors in all the states and territories in our country to do. And it will be very similarly aligned with the petition that we will be delivering, which again has 250,000 signatures, which is crazy, and a very exciting force of people power. One last question on that matter, Jessica. When are you guys planning on introducing that resolution and letting the City Council know about it?
We've been talking with several people on the City Council. We have yet to have anybody step forward to sponsor the resolution. Could have something to do with McKinley's power in Ann Arbor and their vast billions of dollars. But yeah, so we need to get a City Council person to sponsor the resolution, preferably more than one.
Maybe there'll be more about
it. I know someone who I believe who would sponsor it, and he's not running for a seat next election either, or this coming election for re-election. So
nothing to lose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back with their convictions. So that's great. And then I think you guys can definitely talk about that online. I think that's the perfect meeting the minds. I wanted to talk about some of the stuff that Amber brought up. And so first of all, that resolution Jessica was talking about, and in addition to all of the municipal actions that Amber discussed, I think are all like really great steps, and having this trigger law for rent control if it becomes instituted at the state level or at a federal level, like allowing rent control, so that we would have the first rent control laws on the books here in Ypsilanti, would be fantastic. I know, Amber, that is that an initiative that people can help out with if they're interested as well? I just wanted to give you an opportunity to plug that if that's something that people can get involved with.
That's a good question. So I'm helping a group with that right now, but I don't think there's anything officially above board yet, but I'd be happy to communicate that information with you whenever there's a next housing discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to let us know when that is something that is ready for people to like sign on to and express their support for, or help advocate, we'd love to help promote that through all of our social media channels. And the same goes for you, Jessica, for the resolution as well. And I want to talk about the idea that there needs to be like a radical shift and realignment in our values as a society and as a government in order for us to properly address issues like gentrification. Because I've also heard some of the discussions that Ann Arbor talks about around how to address their affordable housing crisis. And essentially the Ann Arbor government says we don't have money to build units. So we have to wait for private developers to build these units and offer us up some like essentially being willing to like pay the money to create these units. And then we want to like have some affordable housing as part of the units that they develop, is like what I've heard city council members saying about this issue. So that puts us in a bind as a community, because why can't we just create our own units? Well, we don't have enough money. And why do we not have enough money? Well, because we're just one city. The federal government, with its vast resources, should be stepping up and creating or offering funds and allocating funds towards the development of public housing units. And that's something that has not happened at the level that it needs to in our country, which is why our campaign would want to focus on, at the federal level, allocating funding towards increasing units, allocating funding towards renovating old units that have fallen into disrepair, and repealing something called the Fair Cloth Amendment, which right now prevents a lot of new development for affordable housing units in our country. But I think that was a really great discussion on gentrification. And
so,
I wanted
really quickly, from what you said about public housing and government getting involved with that at a national level, I think that's exactly spot on. But also something to keep in mind is to like imagine how we can create public housing for people of all different types of income levels, and not just build one, like a building or have an area of like, because that's still segregation. It's like, okay, we're creating public housing for poor people. No, we want to create public housing that's equitable so everybody can enjoy access to downtown and where they work or wherever. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the Bernie and AOC bill around, Green New Deal for public housing, creating these really vibrant communities that at the same time are that are publicly owned and also sustainable, and built around green infrastructure and environmentally friendly policies. Like that's a prime opportunity for not only just poor people, but other people at other income levels to participate in housing that is owned by the public, the government, right? So so I want to move on to another question, just to kind of keep it going, because we do want Jessica and Tucker to be able to kind of talk to us about like what all went down with the rent strike there. So, and this question is actually for, so like right before we talk about the rent strike, I want to talk about homelessness. So this question is for Zachary. How do you propose helping the homeless population during this crisis? What keeps us from using empty housing as public housing? Once the crisis is over, what can be done to help secure more affordable housing in places like Ann Arbor, one of the most expensive places to rent in the country?
So I haven't personally kept up on everything that is happening in Ann Arbor. I know a few things that a lot of the response was dependent on county government and not just city government. And I think at the beginning of the crisis, I wrote an email. A lot of people were advocating for putting houseless people into hotels, which different cities were doing. Some were not. Las Vegas was painting boxes on a parking lot. So that was the intention, but I forget where exactly the hotel was, but area residents complained and the hotel decided not to do that. But what I have seen on the positive side is there are a lot of generous people in Ann Arbor, and they do donate to food gatherers or to United Way. I know I saw an article that they raised like $1 million or something like that. And so there are people that are giving financial resources or items that people need. And this is great for, emergency response. I want to see our community get to a point where we don't need all of this, where where we have housing for people and the houseless community. And I don't know where I'm going with this. I've been working with somebody named Gordon, who experienced houselessness for a lot longer than I did. And he is trying to build a shelter in Ypsilanti, similar to the Delanis Center, multi-level, he has all kinds of ideas of what's needed, what like a diversity of social resources and help that people need on their path to being independent. So that's something that I'm going to continue to work on, see where I fit into what I can help with that.
For sure. Does anyone have any other thoughts on like how we can help the homeless population, during this crisis or beyond?
Well, I know that we're very lucky in Ann Arbor to have a number of organizations dedicated to just that purpose. So for example, my fiance is employed with Avalon Housing, which is a nonprofit dedicated specifically to housing people or making sure that people have access to housing, especially as it relates to issues of mental health or substance abuse or substance use issues. And I won't claim to be an expert on that topic by any means, but one thing that I do know through my exposure to that part of her life is that this is a extremely diverse group of people who are facing all sorts of different challenges. And if there is a unifying factor, it's that they really just need opportunities. They need places to go that they can feel secure and that they can use as a rock, if you will, on which to build the rest of their lives out. And so the COVID-19 crisis is amplifying all of the injustices that are already present in our society. And so if we're going to combat that right now, we're going to need to emphasize support for organizations like Avalon Housing and others in the community that are doing the work and that don't have to just start from scratch, but are actually present in these communities already.
For sure, 100%. Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, having that institutional memory and supporting the people who have already taken the initiative, organizations that have learned a lot about the communities that they're trying to support, and not have like a one-size-fits-all solution. Understanding that different communities have different needs and that the organizations in those communities can speak most knowledgeably about those needs because they've been there, they've been doing it, so for sure. So I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
want to uplift a couple things that I don't know if anyone has said it yet during this call, that, you know, if we're going to think about housing and housing justice, we really have to think of it as a human right. And orienting our way of thinking around people that are experiencing houselessness as an injustice, and, you know, not something that is acceptable, means that, you know, supporting the self-determination of those folks, and how they see and how they envision what their needs are and what they want to do to meet their next goal. I do think there's a couple organizations doing a good job that I know of. I'm sure there's more, but I would say Peace House in Ypsilanti is a good place to plug in to support folks that are working within houseless communities and alongside in a more mutual aid fashion, as well as Mission, the Warming Center in Ann Arbor.
That's great. Yeah. And thank you for naming those two communities and organizations that are supporting the houseless community. And we absolutely need to think of housing as a human right. And like, what is a human right? It's just something that everyone needs, like food, like water, right? And like when we talk about healthcare, like, I mean, as a medical student, like Medicare for all and the need for everyone to have healthcare in our country, we talk about healthcare being a human right. And I ask people, like, you know, so what does that mean? Essentially just means if you're sick, you should be able to see a doctor. If you're sick, you should be able to get your medicine. You should be able to get your treatment. Like, that's all it's saying. And similarly with housing, in the richest country that has ever existed in the history of mankind, people should be able to go to sleep and live with a roof over their heads. Like, it's just a simple value statement like that. Like, that is exactly what, and people shouldn't be hungry in our society. They should be able to drink water that is like free from contaminants and lead and pollution. Like, that is something that every single person deserves, regardless of who they are, or how much money they make, what, you know, how big their bank account is, what their race is, what their religion is. That's something that every single person in this country should have. Especially in a country that should be a country of abundance and not be a country of austerity. And something I talk about a lot is, you know, we are the richest country in the world. And we need to start acting like it. We're not a poor country that's just barely getting by. We've got all of this money, but we spend it on dumb stuff. We spend on these tax breaks for corporations. We spend on this bloated military budget. Even Bill Gates, a billionaire, was like, if we only spent 5% of our military budget on public health, like, we wouldn't have this awful pandemic. You know, socialism's creeping up to everyone in our society. And like, you know, we're spending it on all different sources of, we're spending our money in so many ways that are not actually benefiting our own people. And so we have to ask, like, what is the function of being such a rich country and having such a red hot economy that everyone was like all of the analysts and economists were saying that we have previous to the coronavirus, if we feel like that we never have enough money to be able to invest in our own citizens and spend it on healthcare, on housing, on college, on preventing hunger, on the environment and clean water, why even be a rich country if we're just acting like one that is so poor and that can't meet the basic needs of its citizens? So I wanted to turn our attention to a rent strike. And I want to ask Jessica and Tucker, do you believe a rent strike or cancellation of rent to be a viable economic intervention during this pandemic? I feel like it's a little bit of a rhetorical question because it clearly was effective for you guys, but, you know, why do you believe that this is an intervention that you think that can be effective in the middle of our coronavirus situation?
Do you want to address that, Tucker, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I would say that, so we did not start a rent strike yet. we haven't taken that step, and the reason that we haven't taken that step is not because it's not a just cause or because it's not a useful tool, but because it's such a harsh one, and it's kind of equivalent to starting a fight, if you will, with your landlord. And so the way we see it, a rent strike is the leverage you have, and everyone involved hopes that it doesn't get there, but it's going to get there if you end up with a situation where you have rampant unemployment and no relief coming from the government, and landlords refuse to cooperate in in assisting their residents. So I would say personally, I am absolutely supportive of a rent strike at as large of a level as possible, whether it be in our local community or nationally. But it needs to have a purpose, just like any strike. You have demands. And for us, what those demands are is that, we were, and we'll get into this when we talk about what happened in our particular case, but we were surprised by rent increases all of a sudden. It's not just that we were being asked to pay our rent and we couldn't afford it, but our rent was increasing at this time. And so, our number one goal in light of that was, well, okay, we need to stop that. We need to make it so that the people who already live here can continue to live here and not have to suddenly become housing insecure due to a rent increase in the middle of a pandemic. And so, just organizing, just showing solidarity with your neighbors is the number one, first line of defense. And then the rent strike is if you don't, the threat, if you will, of, if you don't work with us, then this is what we're going to have to do.
Yep. Solomon, would it be appropriate for us to go through what happened now?
I think that's perfect.
Okay, wonderful.
Great. Thank you.
So, yeah, obviously we completely support the rent strike. And what we did was we organized successfully for a rent freeze is what we got from McKinley. Because we, felt that was a demand that we could win. And it's a demand that we felt that knowing the people that live in our complex, that they would want to join an organization and potentially try to fight for that. So we're renting from McKinley, which is a huge, huge corporation. They make, I wrote it down, $500 million a year. And they own $4.6 billion in property. And their founder is the former chair of the Michigan Republican Party and is a Trump fundraiser. And their McKinley people have been behind like the right to work laws in Michigan and the attacks on public education. And now the founder of McKinley, who's retired now, Ron Weiser, he's on our University of Michigan Board of Regents in Ann Arbor. So this is a very wealthy, very powerful, organization that we are, going up against. I'm going to pass it over to Tucker for the next part.
So, so because it's so large and so widespread, with so much, so many assets, the thing we wanted to focus on first was just our local community here at Traver Crossing. So that's about 400 or so apartments with usually about one family per apartment. So it's rare that only a single person will live in an apartment. You usually have families, couples, or families with children. And it's actually an extremely diverse community we have here because this is basically the bracket of housing affordability that is most represented in Ann Arbor. So it's working class people who work at the university or around the university in support of the university, and so we've got a huge amount of diversity of who we are, and all of us. The thing that we suddenly kind of brought up with, as I alluded to earlier, was that we were suddenly getting these rent increases, and it wasn't just a small increase. So in previous years, like I've lived here for 3 years. And in previous years, there's been increases of, $30 or one year it was $0. And this is just, in the absence of any kind of pandemic situation, of course. And then this year, suddenly, a lot of us were getting rent increases as high as $200 a month, being kind of just like pushed on us, like, here, sign this. At any time that would have been unjust, but especially now, it's just completely unacceptable to kind of force that on people while we're, so many people are facing financial insecurity, even if they're not unemployed. The increase in expenses associated with trying to, remain food secure and supporting, our neighbors and all that. So the wonderful thing is that just by, building up our organization strategy, and I think I'll let Jessica get into exactly how we did it. We were able to get a rent freeze now for basically, it looks like anyone who asks for it is getting a $0 rent increase. And in fact, I myself, I had already signed, because I felt pressured to, I had already signed a smaller increase And I was reached out to by our property manager after we had, kind of submitted our demands and done all of the work. And they offered me to renew, even though I had already signed, they offered to cancel that and renew at a $0 increase. And so that's just, as an example of the success we've met with. So Jessica.
Okay, so the first step that we did was, so No Rent Michigan put this up on Facebook and suggested that people use this template to start organizing in their communities. And so this is the first thing we did. And I put my own personal information on it because this is pre-organization here. And it's basically just proposing to people that we, link up on social media so that we can take care of each other during the pandemic, whether it's that, we want to coordinate getting food or, God forbid, like coordinate taking care of somebody who gets sick and make sure that they're not alone in their apartment, so that was kind of the first step. And then the people who reached out to me initially, the handful of people, that's what I created the Facebook group. It's a Traver Crossing Tenants Association, and it's a private Facebook group, and started adding people to that. And so what we started out doing was just, having discussions about somebody was like, I have like 1 million Ziploc bags, I have 1 million sponges, like for whatever reason, and nobody wanted to go to the store. So we were just kind of trying to coordinate, how to, get supplies and take care of each other and figure out which, grocery delivery services were actually, functioning. But really quickly, the conversation turned to the rent increases, and people were just comparing notes about how much was your rent increase, and of course, because it's up to now, it's been completely individual negotiations on each lease. It was all across the board, as high as $195, and then when we first started doing this, mine was like the lowest, I think, at $55 increase, but it was just completely, we started hearing from people that, people who had pushed back on their own, pre-organizing, got significant concessions, and so that kind of like, perked up our ears. We were like, okay, this is not, a done deal. So our next step was on the Facebook group, we talked about starting a petition, and the Facebook group has been a great way for us to organize because it really allows us to be democratic and to also be able to draw in new people that we don't already know. We can discuss things on the Facebook group, we can take votes. So we came up with a petition that we made on change.org that were specific demands that we wanted to present to Traver Crossing Management in McKinley. And so our demands were no rent increases, no late fees, a 15% rent discount as opposed to the 5% discount that they're currently giving us, moratorium on evictions, and we added in there a specific concern about the laundry rooms, because that can be like a dangerous place during a pandemic, that we wanted them to provide us with some wipes and way to keep ourselves safe when doing laundry. So we asked only people who are McKinley tenants to sign on to this because we thought it would be more powerful that way. Let's see, what do we do next? Okay. So that happened, and then we, once we had this up online, we, because I didn't feel comfortable really like knocking on people's doors or like talking to people that I don't know, because I feel like that kind of freaks people out a lot during this pandemic. And so, but what the tactic that we've been using a lot of is printing out flyers and pasting them up so that people don't have to touch them. They can just read them or take a picture of it with their phones. And so that's how we got the petition out and about. And we put it on the front and back door of every single unit. And then we started, getting slowly people trickling in and signing it and asking to join the Facebook group. The next thing that happened was we were contacted by the Ann Arbor News, and they were doing an article about not just McKinley, but the general situation for renters in Ann Arbor. And so it was very helpful that they called up the CEO of McKinley and said, hey, what about these rent increases? And he lied. He said, that's an unfounded rumor. And then the reporter came back to us, and then we were, because we had our organization at this point, we were able to just collect like tons of evidence and screenshots and pictures of people's leases, that we were able to send to the reporter and substantiate what we were saying.
And so I want to cut in there and just point out that what that says about the strategy of McKinley Housing, but perhaps it could be more broadly applicable, is that they were relying on us not being organized in order to get this rent increase through. And so if it were the case that we were not talking to each other and we had not had this association started, it would have been impossible really for us to effectively counter that completely false claim that these rent increases were not happening. But because we had been talking to each other, because we were, organizing, it was easy to just collect information and put that together as like, no, this is very obviously a lie on their part.
Yep. And so now we have management is sending people around to take down our flyers and getting calls from the media. There was a second story that was started and they were calling as well. And so they're taking down our flyers and then they put up their own flyer, which we credit as a direct response to us. And the scrap that they threw us with this flyer was adding on that we could use $250 from our security deposit towards our rent money in May or in June. Okay.
Which is already our money.
Yes, already.
So then let's see, what happened next was on the Facebook group. So after that amount of organizers, we started hearing back from people on the Facebook group that they were still being told that their rent would increase, but it was increasing less. And so at this point, the going rate of the increase was about $60, down from, in some cases, hundreds of dollars. So that already we were like, okay, this is like really working, let's keep charging ahead. And at that point, we started the effort around the city council. And then I'm gonna put it back over to Tucker.
So as Jessica mentioned, at this point, McKinley Property Management was actually taking down the flyers as we were putting them up, which to us, it's a sign of their opposition, of course, to our organizing, but also it's a sign that they care, which was, kind of motivating in a way that, you reach out to your neighbors and they are seeing that and they're scared. And so just, as a testament to the power of actually just organizing with your neighbors. So our next kind of strategy, do you know, Solomon, if I would be able to effectively use the screen sharing feature of Zoom here?
I actually don't know, but I feel like I don't think you can. But
okay, that's totally fine.
I'll ask my.
Oh, it looks like Jessica has what I was going to show you there. You might have to say something so that it'll come up, Jessica.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm speaking now so that this flyer will come up. Hello.
Yep. Yeah, we can see you now.
Oh, you can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So we put up basically a pared down, like kind of eye-catching flyer in color this time that says, oh, okay, wait, I'm seeing a notification from one of our organizers here that the share screen might work. So I'll just give it a shot and we'll just see if it works. Does that work? You seeing that? So this flyer was our idea for kind of getting more eyes on it. And so the idea was that we wanted people to know that management was kind of nervous, is the way I would put it. And so we wanted just people to see like, oh, there's kind of a conspiratorial angle to it of like, oh, we're doing something kind of, that we're not supposed to in the eyes of management. And we're taking back our power. And we saw a pretty significant increase in the number of people who were interested in the Facebook group based on this flyer. But of course, just like it says, they take down our flyers. These went down within a couple days of going up. And then we had, let's see if I have another one. I think it's this. Is that the same one? Yeah, that's the same one. I'm sorry.
No, it's a different one.
Is that a different one? Oops. Okay.
Yeah, that's the next one. So
okay, so and then this one was kind of based on, so at this point we had started to get a few people here and there who were saying, oh, I asked, I pushed back and they're giving me a $0 increase. But it's not exactly just if only people who are aware of this are able to get that $0 increase, because especially, like I said, this is a very diverse community of people we live with. A lot of people here, for example, don't speak English as their first language, and that's going to be a barrier to their ability to negotiate with management in terms of getting a lower rate. And so what we want now is for every this to be as broad as possible. So at this point, we're trying to ask people, you should ask for a $0 rent increase. You know, people are getting that. You should know that people are getting that, and you should get it too. And so the rhetorical aim here for us was that we don't want, you know, we assume we probably already reached all of the people who are, let's say, politically sympathetic to our movement. And there are surely still a large chunk of people who may not be interested in engaging politically. They may not be interested in organizing for its own sake, but they definitely are going to want to save money.
Yeah.
Right. And so we wanted to bring people in who were interested financially, you know, in the benefits of organization at this point. And again, we saw a big wave of people who were interested in that based on these flyers. And so we kind of had to become strategic about, you know, we learned who was taking down the flyers. We learned their schedule of when they were around, and we placed them up as soon as we knew that they weren't going to be around on the weekend. And you know, kind of had to engage in a little bit of, let's say, guerrilla warfare here. But this worked. And so the fight is not over by any means. So first of all, we want to continue to push and make sure that they're not just giving $0 rent increases to people who are asking, but to everyone as a blanket, you know, policy. And then after this, I mean, like we said, we wanted to just focus on our own community first, but there's a huge number of people who live on McKinley management properties who do not live in our particular community. So we're thinking now is the time to start expanding into other communities. And since I know that this is predominantly probably going to be viewed by people who are in, you know, 12th District of Michigan, I want to say that if you live on a McKinley property and you're not already a part of our tenants association, please reach out to us, especially if you don't live on Traver Crossing, if you live in another McKinley property. We would love to hear from you and see about how we can maybe get together towards extending this and expanding it and getting as much information out there and as much organization done as possible, because it's necessary. But I think that's all I had to say on that for now. Oh, and I should just replug our email address. So it's travercrossingta@gmail.com. So that's, I think it was up on the screen there. So hopefully people can see it there, the spelling. But yeah, just please reach out to us with any questions, any inquiries. We want to engage you with as broad a network of people as possible.
Can I just say that is so badass? Like, I mean, honestly, it's like something you'd see like in a movie or something, you know, but that's a really cool thing, is that you guys are just regular people, you know, being right. Innovative and using the materials and resources that we have in the middle of our pandemic, which is like printing paper and
right.
and taping to doors, not knocking on doors, not actually having to like being able to talk to people in person. But I think that's a really, really cool model. I love how you went from, you know, just join our Facebook group to management doesn't want you to see this sign to like, do you want to save money? And like every step of the way you were getting concessions. And it is really remarkable how I think everyone is always surprised at the power of organizing and the power of getting people together to like demand something, you know, and like something that before I was running for Congress and before I was a medical student, I founded this group called the Michigan Resistance, which has made tens of thousands of calls to Republican legislators in our state government out in Lansing, and to try to get them to stop bad bills and to like not vote for Republican pieces of legislation. And we are our little group, and it's definitely grown quite a bit. And we have got like, you know, phone banks now, which are like people getting together and making calls in many cities across the state. But even when it was smaller, our group was like so surprised because we were just making like, you know, a couple hundred calls, and people were like, it really shook these politicians. You know, people would actually like went to the floor of the House and they were like, I've gotten like 200 calls on this issue. Like that's the most calls I've ever gotten in my entire life. I'm voting no on this. And like 200 calls is like certainly a lot of calls, but it's also like within the realm of possibility. Like if you tell people like, if you can get, you know, 200 calls made into this office, people are like, well, that doesn't seem that crazy difficult. It feels like something that me and like some of my neighbors and some of my family could like get some other people to get into and try to pull off, you know? So
right.
It's people like corporations, the government, politicians, they're like very, very scared when of the power of people coming together and with unified voice, demanding something, insisting on something. So I just really want to applaud you guys for doing that. And I think that this model that you've come up with certainly like needs to be shared and replicated, because I think a lot of people, when they hear about like try to organize, first of all, a lot of people haven't organized before, but like organizing without being able to actually talk to a person just seems so daunting, you know? And like, I even was like, how do they do it? Like, I have no idea. So, but it's, I love just like that, how elegant and how simple your solution was, which is, you know, very accessible to all people, right? Just make a Facebook group, print some pages, put it on some doors. And of course, I mean, it's really cool. It's really smart, but it's also really accessible to so many people, you know?
Right. And that was absolutely our goal. We didn't want to talk to people face to face at this time. And so we just wanted to reach as many people as possible through more passive means. And we were absolutely delighted. I think you said it really well, by just how effective organizing really is with even just a relatively small amount of effort. You don't have to be a career activist or a career politician to get something done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, you know, it's 7:47. So I wanted to turn to some questions that our audience has put up. And then at the very end, we'll make like a final like call to actions, you know? So we'll take about 10 minutes to do this. So let me go through some of these questions here. So Gordon Smith asks, what do you mean by affordable? Because I know we talk about like housing for all, housing is a human right, but you know, this issue is often presented as affordable housing. So
oh, right. That is like the buzzword that when I first started here getting into local politics, and here that's what was talked about. And that's like calculated, that's the 30% AMI, whatever that is. But in Ann Arbor, that's really high. That's like somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. You know, so when these huge developments go up and have, you know, what council is making, that is incentivizing them to add affordable units, they add like 4 units to a building of like 200 or something like that, and it's for middle-class young professional people. So I think we need to recognize that and just be like, we need housing, and maybe not define it in terms of class, you know, our loose economic class terms that we have, but at monetary levels, and we need housing at a wide range. So that's I've heard of like low income housing as well as affordable housing, and then public housing. You know, I think those are the buzzwords that are kind of used. So, and I think it's kind of like a I don't know, maybe not quite as strong as propaganda, but as like, you know, the average person thinking like, oh yeah, I'm in support of affordable housing for people at lower income levels, and they don't know that, okay, affordable housing is actually middle class to upper middle class, even possibly in Ann Arbor, or there I am using class terms again, but you know, 30% AMI, which works out to 40 or 60,000 in Ann Arbor, and that's excluding a whole lot of people.
I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because like in Ann Arbor, right, like it's just gonna be vastly different than like other communities, but that doesn't mean that like people don't get a deserve to live in these communities just because the definition is much higher here, right? Awesome. So Rebecca, or I'm sorry, we'll answer her question in just a second. Gordon also asks, what do you, Solomon, plan on doing for the physically disabled houseless community? So part of our housing plan is that we want affordable housing. I guess that's me using the term affordable again, but we want housing that can be accessed by people with lower incomes, near public transportation, outlawing housing discrimination on the basis of disability, and working directly with the houses community on proposals. So that is also, some of those elements are part of our housing plan that is on our website, which you can go to at solomonrajput.com and look at our housing policy. And we've got policy briefs on all of these different housing policies, which is something we're very proud of. I'm sorry, which on all of these different policies, housing being one of them. And we're actually going to roll out a policy on for people with disabilities very soon, I think like within the coming week or two, hopefully closer to a week. So question from Rebecca is, when we are bargaining with landlords, is there a way to bargain for rent forgiveness or for rent reduction? So I wanted to ask, Tucker and Jessica, you've been very successful at a rent freeze, which is amazing, very exciting, and shows the power of organizing. What are your thoughts on organizing for rent forgiveness or for rent reduction?
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
I mean, I think the bottom line is it just depends on how organized you are. Like what you can achieve in terms of demand is just directly related to how much power that you have. Right.
That's absolutely exactly what I was going to say. Is it's that if you're a single renter going to your landlord and saying, I can't afford the rent at this rate, most likely what they'll say is good luck somewhere else, right? That they're not incentivized financially to be compassionate. No business is. That's just how capitalism works, really. Mm-hmm. And so if you have the opportunity, and I know that not everyone lives in a community where they have a large number of people who all share a landlord, but if you do, the strongest thing you can do is to talk to your neighbors, because they're probably going through the same thing. And if you can all go as a collective unit and say, this is unjust and we demand that you do something different, it's going to be a lot harder for them, as much bluster as they might like to say about, well, I'll just find someone else to fill this, one apartment if you leave. It's extremely dangerous for a large property management company to lose, say, 100 renters or even 10 renters worth of rent, even for a single month. That would be devastating potentially to a business that expects a certain amount of revenue. And so if you can organize and present as a single unit, that's going to be much more powerful. Whatever your demands are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that just goes to show the testament of organizing, right? And I think that other communities might be interested in trying to negotiate with their landlords for rent freeze or rent reduction, and that's what Rent Strike 2020 is focused on as well, right? Like we have these hundreds of thousands of people in our state, and our state, I mean, it's a big state. We have like 8 to 10 million people, so like 200,000 to 300,000 signatures among that is like a pretty hefty portion of the people in our state already voicing that we need relief right now, or else we are going to start organizing to not only to have rent freezes, but also rent forgiveness and rent reduction, or else the rent strike will be the tool that we have to use in order to leverage that.
Right. And one thing I would add to that is that, and this is true with labor organizing as well, but the majority is the body that you are part of as a renter, right? There are many more renters, and this is just how businesses have to operate. There are many more renters than there are landlords, and that has an intrinsic power to it. So you can organize and have a lot of power, even if you feel powerless as an individual, just based on that numerical advantage. And so the advice I would give to anyone who's interested in advocating for themselves or for their neighbors to have, for example, rent forgiveness, would be to recognize that you are not alone. Even if your landlord only has you as a tenant, the people who live around you are probably going through the same thing. So you're never alone in this.
For sure. So McMatthew99 says, I saw that the CARES Act prohibits landlords from imposing fees on late payments. Does this also include late fees, or just fees for not paying the late fee. So from my understanding, the act bars landlords from charging late fees and other penalties because of a tenant's non-payment during the duration of the 120 days that it takes effect. But whether or not late fees and interest on rental payments are prohibited from accruing during the grace period and being charged after it ends, that part is unclear. And I think it needs to be, I think the act did not, from our understanding, define that very clearly. Okay, so what time are we at? Okay, so we're at 7:56. Let's see if there's one last really quick question that I want to ask everybody. If everyone wants to just give like a 30-second response, and then I want to just kind of like recap some of the action items that people can walk away with. So how can people get more involved in organizing efforts around issues like housing and issues around paying rent during the middle of this coronavirus epidemic? So everyone just wants to give like a 20-30-second little whatever they feel about this.
Well, I'll just start then. I would say it's actually a lot easier than you may think. And the reason that it's easier than you may think is that it doesn't require a huge amount of effort to just get in touch with people. And that is the most important step, is getting in touch and staying in touch. And so probably no matter who you are, you probably, you may have a cell phone or an email address or access to Facebook, or even if you don't, you have neighbors who you can talk to in person. And doing that, just getting in touch and talking about these issues with each other is the single most important step in my experience. Should we maybe pass it off directly?
Zach, do you want to go next? Zachary.
Oh, me? Oh, sure. So for me, activism is pretty new to me, political activism. I started going to city council meetings in July 2019, but I went to every single one since then. And for a long time, it was just me. For me, it was speaking at public comment, and I really loved that. But not everybody. Public speaking terrifies a lot of people. But it's just like slowly getting connected with people. If anybody wants to hear about my public comment experience on Twitter, just message me at Violin Monster, and yeah, I don't want to keep it short. I'm sorry. So
that's perfect. Yeah, public
there. Yeah,
council meetings is great. Amber.
Sure. Getting plugged in, I think looks different for individuals, and in my experience, I think absolutely talking to your neighbors for sure, but at this point there's quite a bit of things out there that you can plug directly into. And I think what's important to remind ourselves of, especially in Ypsilanti, 70% of households are renter households. We are far and away the majority in our city, so we have a lot of leverage. But in order to use that, we do need to organize, but we also have to build trusting relationships. So I think that's a part of the key, is to get to know other sides of your community that you were not previously connected to, and build trusting relationships, care about each other, help each other, and build from the ground up the power that we need, and the solidarity that we need to be able to take on these big issues, because it can't just be a small short-term effort. It's going to take a sustained amount of time to get some of the things that we want and achieve some of the goals that we have. It's completely doable, but I think we've been so alienated from each other. A lot of us don't even know our own neighbors, myself included sometimes, because with renters, they change so much. So it is a harder effort, but I think the payoff to building those relationships is so much, and will kind of lead you naturally to your next step.
Awesome. And to finish off with Jessica.
Okay, so really briefly, the specific action steps that people could take is if you live around Ann Arbor, we need help with that city council resolution. If you are a renter from McKinley or any renter who wants to organize, we'd love to link up with you. Our email is thetravercrossingta@gmail.com. And I mean, what we really, really need is like people just to do the hard and very often uncomfortable work of organizing, because it involves talking to people that you don't already know, which is so, but yeah, that's what we need to do.
Amazing. Amazing. Sounds great. And for sure, I'd like to offer up one last action step, which is that everyone who is interested in this Run Strike movement, please go to runstrike2020.org, sign the petition. We will be delivering the petition signatures to Governor Whitmer very soon in the coming weeks. So if that's something you're interested in, if you're from, I know we have some viewers from across the country, which is very cool. So if you're interested in this, you don't have to be from Michigan. You can sign that. That's a national movement. And whoever is kind of taking on the petition in your state can get and can have your signature as well. If you're interested in that, you can also reach out to the Run Strike 2020 organization. Their information is on their website, and I'm sure they would be happy to have more people like you who are interested in organizing and wanting to help out, especially because it is a 50-state effort. So one last thing about our campaign. So thank you guys so much. I want to thank the audience for watching. If you guys support what we're talking about and support kind of a wanting to get more progressive candidates in office who are going to be advocating for these issues, please go to solomonrajput.com. You can sign up for our email list. You can donate. Of course, all donations are very welcome. Our election is in 3 months and 2 days, which is crazy. We're feeling very excited and very optimistic because we're building a huge army of people to talk to all the voters in our district. And if you are a young person, or anybody really, but if you're in particular, if you're a young person, if you're a high school student, if you're a college student, and you want to become part of our campaign is offering internships. And it's a really, really awesome experience because you get to meet a lot of other young progressive people. We have people from even outside of the state who are joining, and we've wanted to create our internship to be a place of community and camaraderie in the middle of this global pandemic. So it's a way to get involved, to take some of the time that people have extra on their hands and to use it towards advocating for progressive policies and trying to get more progressive people in Congress. So I just want to end by saying thank you so much to all of our panelists, Jessica, Zachary, Tucker, and Amber. You guys have done an amazing job. Honestly, I have learned so much. You guys have all brought so much, such a depth of experience, knowledge, policy that I think was really helpful for our viewers and certainly was very helpful for me. So thank you guys so much for wanting to be part of this. You guys can stick around if you want to just debrief, or if you guys need to go, that's, whatever totally works. But this does conclude our town hall about housing and the coronavirus. So thank you to everyone who watched. We'll be doing another town hall very soon, and I can't wait to talk to you guys all again. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.